Britain is not going to get involved in another war in Iraq. We're not going to be putting boots on the ground. We're not going to be sending in the British Army. Yes, we should use all the assets that we have, our diplomacy, our political relationships, our aid, the military prowess and expertise that we have to help others. We should use these things as part of a strategy to put pressure on Islamic State and to make sure this terrorist organisation cannot cause mayhem on our own streets.
Couple more guests on this to talk through it with us. We've got Chris Nineham, who's Vice Chairman of the Stop the War campaign, and also Julie Lenars, who's from the Human Security Centre. Hello to you both.
Hi, Simon.
Hello.
Great. OK, let's start with Chris Nineham. And so you must be pleased with this news, Chris, that there won't be boots on the ground.
Yeah, I am, but I think we're getting mixed messages from the Prime Minister, and I also think that there's already been a level of mission creep. We were told originally this is purely humanitarian, but British fighter planes have been involved in reconnaissance, obviously linking up with the US bombing. So what, if you notice, if you read it carefully, what David Cameron didn't say is that British planes won't be involved in any bombing, and that's what we want to hear, because I think it would be absolutely insane to follow the terrible experience of the occupation and invasion of Iraq, which after all is the kind of root cause of the current crisis,
surely
with more bombing.
Surely the root cause is a barbarian medieval ideology that seeks to purge and behead anyone that isn't of their own strain and slant.
That's just a description. That's not a analysis of any kind. The truth is that the destruction of the Iraqi infrastructure, the terrible misery of the occupation, combined with deliberate policies of divide and rule, have planted the seeds of the current crisis in Iraq. I think there's no question that what we were involved in the last decade in Iraq has been the basis of this. And after not just Iraq but Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, all operations that have ended in disaster, I think any thought of further Western military intervention by Britain or by the US should be ruled out.
Well, I wondered how long it would be before you mentioned the US. It seems to me that Stop the War are in favour of stopping most wars as long as they involve the US or Israel.
No, I mean, our analysis is that actually if the West gets involved in yet another war in the Middle East, if in fact, the US already is, obviously, all it will do is deepen the conflict. It will pour oil on the flames, and it can only make matters worse.
What about the Bosnia example, where the West intervened in Bosnia and stopped genocide?
Well, I mean, that's very, very arguable whether that was in fact the case. Lots of people died in that war, and lots of people died as a result of Western bombing, actually. And look at the state of the country now. It's a country that still remains...
Well, it's better than it was, than Milosevic running riot, isn't it?
Well, it wasn't actually the bombing that got rid of Milosevic. But anyway, let's look at the recent experience in the Middle East, because we're talking about the Middle East. Iraq was, everyone agrees, was a catastrophe. Afghanistan, clearly the country's been broken, and there's been no progress there whatsoever. Libya is a failed state, and Syria is involved in the most terrible civil war. We don't want to make the situation in Iraq worse.
Let's bring in Julie Lenars then from the Human Security Centre. Do you accept that analysis, Julie Lenars, that Western intervention is always problematic?
No, not at all. And by the way, first of all, I would dispute that everybody believes that Iraq 2003 was a catastrophe. Actually, if you go into Iraq, you speak to people on the ground, you will get very mixed opinions. Some will obviously say, things were better under Saddam Hussein, but many people will also say things are better than under Saddam Hussein, especially if you go to Kurdistan, where I would say probably 80% of the population are grateful for the intervention in 2003. So it's a very black and white picture to say that interventions never work, that they always cause more suffering than they save lives. This is not correct. We also have to look at the other side of the analysis. We regretted not intervening in Rwanda in 1994. We had the same regrets in the Balkans in the late 1990s. So I think we have to be very careful here before we rush to conclusions.
But can I just say, I don't know what Julie's definition of a disaster would be if it's not at least 500,000 people being killed, and a situation now where the country is on the brink of falling apart in a desperate civil war. I mean, how much worse could it have got, really? It seems to me that
But the war ended in 2003, ostensibly, Chris.
No, the British and American troops didn't leave to the end of the decade, and the truth of the matter is that...
Yeah, but they were handed a government. They had a government in place, didn't they? The troops were there just as tokenistic gestures, really.
Well, it was a government that actually has been involved in continuing some of the sectarian policies that they themselves laid the basis for, and has been a major cause of the current crisis.
That's a good point. Julie, can you answer that? That really the government that was handed to Iraq was not an inclusive one, and in that sense we have sown the seeds of this.
Well, first of all, 500,000 people did not die in 2003. That is a gross exaggeration of the actual
I didn't say in
number
2003. This is the accepted figure by Lancet, Britain's leading medical journal, which says that that's the minimum figure of the number of people who died as a direct result of occupation. That's fact.
Well, everybody knows that the Lancet report has been dismissed a long time ago, so I don't accept this analysis. But anyway, to come back to your question, I think what we're seeing now in Iraq has much more to do with non-intervention in Syria than it has to do with intervention in Iraq in 2003. We know that all the attacks on Iraq were actually planned in Raqqa, across the border in Syria, where ISIS has its headquarters. ISIS is mainly a product of the Syrian civil war, of non-intervention in Syria. It's a mistake to believe that what we're seeing in Iraq at the moment has its root cause in 2003.
Well, that's a strange analysis, given that we're talking about a situation that exists in Iraq, and that, you know, the one of the bases for the ISIS ability to mount the attacks it's made has been deep resentment by the Sunni population at the way they've been excluded from government. But leaving that aside...
Chris Nynham, are you one of these people who says that Saddam Hussein, it was better to have kept, or it would have been better to have kept him in power because he kept the lid on these sectarian differences?
Not at all. But I'm a Democrat. I simply believe that it's none of the West's business to intervene in foreign countries and try and determine who runs them.
What about Rwanda?
I believe
would you have intervened in Rwanda?
No, I mean, I believe these questions are questions that can only be sorted out locally and regionally. And on the question of Syria, I mean, it's far from being a question of non-intervention being the problem. The problem has been that the West has actually been arming the Syrian opposition, and this has had all sorts of knock-on effects, including meaning that the IS, have been able to mount a serious military operation into Iraq. So I refute the idea that it was inaction over Syria that has any kind of bearing on the situation.
I hear what you're against, Chris Nynham. I hear what you're against. I don't hear what you're for.
Well, I mean, one thing we could do is let refugees in from these areas that have been so badly...
How would you stop ISIS?
Well, I mean, on a humanitarian basis, one of the questions is refugees. The other is...
Militarily, how would you stop ISIS?
Well, I mean, in the end of the day, there has to be a political solution. But one of the things we could usefully do would be to instruct and put pressure on our allies in the Middle East, some of the most backward regimes, actually, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, to tell them to stop funding ISIS. That would be a useful step the government could take.
Julie Lennars, let's talk about Saudi Arabia, because we do have a uncomfortable bedfellow in them, do we not? Julie, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, talk to me about Saudi Arabia.
Well, I think, in terms of Iraq, at the moment, what we have to do is we have to work with everyone. I mean, also the Arab states, they have to realize that ISIS is a threat not only to Iraq, but other Arab states as well, and including Saudi Arabia, by the way. And I think if we want to find a solution to the crisis in Iraq, then, we need a humanitarian element. We've already started with that. But we also need a military element. That's what the US is doing at the moment. I think Britain should join, by the way. But we also need the support of the Arab world. It's very crucial that we get the Sunni Arab states behind this initiative, because we have to come up with some kind of counter-narrative, if you like, because we have to also win hearts and minds of people. We really need the support of the Arab states, and that unfortunately also includes Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't the root of this really come from the Sunni-Shia sectarian divide, which goes back, thousands of years and really hasn't been addressed yet? I mean, does that not lie at the root cause of this, really?
But this is a myth that the Sunni-Shia divide has been a kind of fault line that's created violence historically. I mean, before 2001, there are very, very few examples in Iraqi history of there being any popular major tensions between the two communities. It was precisely the traumatic experience of the 2003 invasion and what followed that has created these huge tensions. That's the truth, and that has to be recognised.
I think the 60,000 Shia that were slaughtered under Saddam Hussein, I think they would dispute that.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're going to have to leave it there, folks. Interesting discussion. Thank you so much for your time, both of you. That's Chris Nineham, Vice Chairman of Stop the War, and also Julie Lenaz from the Human Security Centre. 16 minutes past 5.
Your station.